Welcome into the checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
Each week on the checklist, we tick off 5 items meant to make your online life safer. Sometimes that's best practices to keep your information safe. Other times it's optimizing your hardware, either making it harder for someone else to get into, or, like today, making it easier for someone else to get into. Which is kind of odd. Why would we want to make your hardware easier for somebody else to get into? Good news, friend, we are selling your Mac. Or, otherwise passing it along. So on today's checklist, 5 steps to take before selling, donating, or giving away your Mac. These are important steps because, passing along your hardware is a good thing. Passing along all of the information you've always kept on that hardware, not a good thing. And as an added bonus, these items will also help you move to your next Mac more easily. So here's the list. Create a backup, which I'm guessing you should be doing anyway. Sign out of Apple services and deactivate third-party apps. Erase and reformat your hard drive. Nothing scary about that at all. Reinstall OS X, and finally maximize your Mac's resale value. Before we get to any of those steps, there's this one thing you need to do. If you're looking to sell your computer rather than, donating it or giving it to a family member, you want to copy down your computer's hardware specs. If you're like me, you have an idea of when your computer was made, and that's about it. I mean, we check the specs when we buy the computer, and then we kind of, then it's the computer that we use, and so, the specs are the specs. But if you want to sell it on like eBay or Craigslist or something like that, people are going to want to actually know what your computer is made of. Most of the information can be found by clicking the Apple icon in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, then clicking About This Mac, and then the screen appears that gives you some information, but then you can click through and get even more information. Newer versions of OS X include different tabs on the About This Mac screen that contain that specific information I was just telling you about. So start up there with the little Apple logo, which, let's face it, is where most of our computing lives begin. At least the people listening to this show, I think. Okay, onwards with the checklist. By the way, I just skipped over a lot of information. All of this information is going to be available at our site, securemac.com/checklist. So don't freak out if you miss anything, because you can always rewind, or you can always read the information again at securemac.com/checklist. And with that, we begin our coverage of today's list. Gentlemen, let's start with something that I know everybody is always supposed to be doing all the time anyway. And yes, I finally do now. Create a backup of your files and data.
It seems like we keep on talking about this over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a backup of all your data. I mean, the last thing you want is getting rid of your computer, reinstalling the system, doing whatever it is, and then realizing, oh man, where are all those pictures? Oh, where are those documents? Where's all that stuff that I had? You just want to have a backup of everything, and we'll keep on talking about it. And if you haven't done so already, now's a good time to start your backup. So you have choices. You could do backups on Time Machine, you could do them on iCloud, or you could do them on any of the third-party services. There's a lot of different websites out there, and there's a lot of different software out there to help you do backups. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you start doing your backups. Most people are going to be doing Time Machine. If they have a external hard drive that they bought, they plug it into the computer, they fire up Time Machine, or their computer detects it, and they just start doing the backups there. iCloud's really cool because you're able to do backups off-site. You're doing them to the cloud. The cloud's this magical place where all your files are stored, not on your computer. So if your computer were to get lost, stolen, damaged, burned up in a fire, all your files could be reobtained from the cloud. It's good to have multiple backups.
Can I ask you a question really quickly, though? Because, the part of my head gets a little confused on what's the most secure thing, right? Like, okay, so I'm running a backup, and I've got a hard drive here on my desk, and I've got another hard drive, under my desk. And so, good, I've got 2 backups, but the problem is both of those backups are in the same place. So, as you say, flood, fire, theft, angry teenager comes in with a hammer. I mean, any number of things could actually lose me those backups. So then, okay, so what I want to do is have one backup here where I live, and then another backup. Oh, I have an idea. I'll take all my information and put it somewhere where I have no control.
If you're talking about the security, if security is a concern there, say you don't want, no matter what security measures are in place with encrypted backups or anything else with iCloud or any other cloud services, say you just don't want your data to be in the hands of a third party. What you could do in that case is you could have two physical hard drives at your place where your computer is, and you're backing up to both of those. You swap them out on a regular basis. You put one in, say, a safe deposit box at a bank, where you've got access to that safe deposit box, and you put the hard drive in there every week, and you kind of swap them out. So you've got essentially two backups going. One that you keep at home for access if you just delete a file by accident, that kind of thing, and one that you've got stored at a secure location. Now, say a tornado came through town and took out both your house and the bank. Okay, yeah, you might lose your files, but you'd also probably have somewhat larger issues to worry about in that case.
Right. And I do actually know. Forgive me. I don't want to name names exactly. I do know of at least one product though where you can keep a hard drive in a secure location elsewhere, so that you can make it do backups. It's like if your mom lives in another state or something like that, you could actually have a piece of hardware that will back up to someplace else, as long as that place is someplace that you trust. And of course, the information is actually not accessible even on that hard drive that is someplace else, unless you get into serious, like movie level hacking kind of stuff.
Backups are generally pretty good at doing their job these days, but there have been times in the past where there have been software issues or hardware issues or whatever where a backup will fail and you won't know it till you try and recover the data. Another issue could be if, like in Time Machine, for example, you can specify folders or drives to skip when Time Machine does its backup. So say you skipped whatever folder and it turns out you actually did need some of those files, you'd want to have kind of put everything over on your new Mac and determined if you had everything before you're wiping everything from your old Mac. So that's kind of one of those reasons to do the backup, make sure it works before you actually get rid of the data.
This isn't really a security question as much as just a personal preference question. How long would you hold on to your old Mac before you finally let it go? I mean, because the kinds of things we're talking about are, okay, you're getting ready to sell this. You've got a new Mac. I mean, part of you may want to go ahead and recover whatever money you can, like in a week. But like, how long would you personally wait before you? How long? It's a ridiculously personal question. I know.
No,
but
right now in my closet, I think I have 3 of those old plastic iBooks, the white plastic ones.
Yeah,
I've got 3 of them. Their hard drives are kind of been ripped out and they're sitting somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Probably don't even work anymore. But yeah, I'm really bad about getting rid of my old hardware, and I should just throw it away at this point because there's. It doesn't even work, I don't think. It was those iBooks that had a lot of the logic board problems. I think I went through quite a few of them that kept getting replaced. And, yeah. I'm not good about getting rid of old hardware.
You've actually crossed into a different question, though. Like, do you ever actually sell your old hardware? What I'm wondering is, as I say, it's probably just a personal question. Like, do you wait like a month? Do you, if you've used your new Mac in a month or for a month and you haven't needed the information, then maybe you've already copied everything that you needed. If you haven't found anything else, I can tell you though, just like traveling, going from one city to another for a few days, I thought I had copied everything I needed to produce a couple of shows, and then got 3,000 miles away, and it's like, hey, where's that piece of music? Oh, exactly. Oh, right, yeah, it's 3,000 miles away.
Mm-hmm. That's when you have to VPN into your home network and get it all back and do what you need to do on the road.
Okay, now you're just talking crazy talk. Let's move on to item 2 on the checklist. This is a tough one, I think. It's sort of along the same lines of, I thought I got everything. Sign out of Apple services and deactivate third-party apps. Signing out of Apple services, I would imagine, is pretty easy, although I can't think of the last time I did. But the whole third-party apps, I mean, talk to me about why this is so important and what are we going to do to make sure we've done it?
First of all, none of these steps are kind of like, they're not, these particular ones about signing out of services aren't critical. You can technically, one way or another, do any of these after you've gotten rid of the Mac if you kind of forget to do them. Mm-hmm. They just are a lot easier if you're still sitting there in front of the hardware and can do it at the computer. If you're using a computer in the way Apple intends you to, kind of using iTunes, iCloud, kind of using those features they provide. Your computer will be kind of signed into Apple services in a few different spots. And you'll want to make sure you're kind of signed out of these. We kind of discussed this in a previous show with iTunes, for example. If you've authorized your computer to play back music you purchased in iTunes, there's a certain number of slots that can be taken up with your hardware, distributed between your Macs, iPhones, iPads, iPods. So when you're getting rid of a computer, you obviously want to be removing the computer from that device limit. And you can do that right in iTunes under the one of the menus is a deauthorize menu. And that will also take care of your Mac App Store app purchases. In iCloud, there are things like signing out of iCloud services, so the backups or keeping your documents in the iCloud, but also Find My Mac. If that's enabled, you'd want to be disabling. And then basically when you sign out from iCloud, it'll display a warning. It can kind of be a little scary at first, but it's like, oh, your data is going to be gone from this computer, but any of your other computers that are signed into iCloud will still have that data. So you're not deleting the data from iCloud, you're just signing out of iCloud, which is just to make sure that differentiation is in place there. And then iMessage, this only really applies to newer versions of OS X, so Mountain Lion or later, and that's if you're using your Apple ID or iMessage account versus AIM or Yahoo or any of the other ones that Apple allows you to use in messages. And you would sign out of that. But again, any of those, if you kind of missed your opportunity to do those while you still have the hardware, you can go to the iCloud website. You can go to your iTunes account online, manage that kind of stuff to remove those settings, deauthorize the hardware after the fact, if need be. It's just usually easier when you're sitting in front of the computer.
And if you're using any of the third-party apps, things that you purchase outside of the Mac App Store, many of those programs have their own licensing preferences, the amount of computers that you're allowed to activate it on. Some of those don't include as many activations, so it's important that you launch the application, see if there's ways to deactivate it. And while you're in there doing that, now is a really good time to start copying down your license keys. How many times have you gone back or down the line go, wait, did I purchase this app? I need this app. And then because you didn't purchase it on the Mac App Store, you're trying to track down licensing information, your registration key, your receipts, things like that. If you have those handy and available, print the screen, have a copy of it. Or when you do get your receipt, put it in a nice, safe place so you could reference those down the line. It'll make it a lot easier versus going to the support center, trying to find the contact information or ways to recover your license key. I mean, you have it right there. So you might as well take the time. It'll make it easier on you and easier on the companies that you're dealing with as well.
This is probably the only thing I love about software as a service. I can't tell you how many times I've spent half a day looking for the original CD or the original DVD that the piece of software came on, because it's got that little piece of paper either taped to it or written on it. The one thing I like about software as a service is I don't have to worry about that activation key anymore when I move from one device to another.
And then if you've been upgrading from version to version to version,
yeah,
usually it's only the first version that you need to supply the key from. But if you ever go back after you've wiped all the data, they're going to ask you for that first version again, not the most recent version that you purchased, or it may not be that case. So having all this information handy makes it a lot easier to recover your software, get it reinstalled on your computer. And that's pretty much, you just want to make it as easy as possible.
Now, you've got one other point down here as far as activating, deactivating, things like that. A lot of times when you go to a website, the first time you go there, you'll have like a two-factor authentication thing pop up if you've set up two-factor authentication. But that can be kind of a pain, especially if it's a website you go to regularly. And so, your Mac will very helpfully say, hey, by the way, do you want to make it so you don't have to turn that second key every time you go here because you're using this Mac. But I'm going to give this Mac to someone else to use. How do I make sure that this Mac is no longer trusted by my accounts? Because while it's still a trustworthy machine, I don't necessarily want it sneaking into my stuff.
So if you've enabled your computer as a trusted device on your computer for two-factor authentication, you're going to want to disable that.
Yeah.
Apple has a website that you could go to manage that. It's appleid.apple.com. And when you log into your account there, under the security section, you could see all of your devices that you have under there. But check to see if you have your old Mac listed there under your trusted devices. If you do, click that X button and remove it. So it's not a trusted device anymore, because you don't want to leave the computer on there. So the next time you log in, it's pinging your old Mac, giving it that second authentication for the two-factor on there.
We come now to what I think will always be the scariest, and we talked about this, I think, in getting your iPhone ready to sell, too. One of the scariest steps, this also goes back to the question I was asking of how long do you hold on to it before you let it go. Erase and reformat your hard drive. That's one of the scariest things. I mean, losing your computer is probably the scariest thing. The second scariest, though, is, oh, yeah, let's just go ahead and blow everything out. Just push that button, and all this stuff goes into the ether. Talk to me about this item, please.
Well, before we get into specifics on how to actually wipe your Mac, let's take a minute and kind of talk about deleting files. What happens when you delete a file, kind of the security involved in deleting files. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you don't want your documents to be going along with your computer when you sell it on eBay or Craigslist or donate it to Goodwill. If you have your tax information or basically anything that maybe you have your tax documents from the previous year. Sometimes those have your Social Security number in them. If you have any of your bank account information in spreadsheets for your budget, just general stuff that nobody else needs to have. So you kind of want to make sure that's totally off the computer and not accessible. Now, when you just delete a file, you drag it to the trash, you empty the trash. File's not visible in the Finder. It's you can't open it anymore. It's gone, right? No, it's not. Basically, depending on the type of hardware, the actual hardware for your hard drive where your files are stored, and depending on your settings in your computer, it can actually be pretty trivial for data you've deleted to be recovered. Usually a third-party utility, data recovery utility, can bring that data back from the dead. And that's kind of... It, again, depends on the type of hardware you have. It was especially true with traditional hard disk drives, HDDs, the ones with the spinning platters, and don't move them when they're running because you could accidentally cause problems. The way they store data on the disk is kind of a linear fashion, so one byte after another. So if you can figure out what the start of the file is, you can kind of grab that data that exists. When you delete a file, the data is still technically sitting there on the drive. It just happens to be it's unlinked from the Finder. Finder doesn't see it anymore, but that data is still there until later on you've created some other file, and that happens to be overwriting the same spot on the actual physical drive. For the old style HDDs, it's possible to securely erase data by overwriting that spot multiple times with randomized data. But with the newer solid-state drives, they don't write data to disk the same way that traditional ones do. So overwriting data in that kind of style no longer applies. It's due kind of to the way solid-state drives store their data and the way they kind of handle the lifetime of the drive, keeping the drive, basically making it last as long as possible. It kind of tries to evenly distribute wear on the drive. So when it's writing a file, it will write it to different spots on the drive. But if you're continually overwriting the same spot on that solid-state drive, it can actually lead to premature drive failure in some cases. There have been some recent studies kind of looking into that more and more, and that's something that is kind of becoming more prevalent, and Apple's actually taken note of that, which we can discuss in a second here. But taking a step back, actually, with regards to the security of your data, every year, usually it's actually around tax time when you have people donating their machines to, for tax write-offs or whatever. There are security companies or data recovery companies will do these kind of studies where they'll buy a bunch of used hard drives on eBay or from a thrift store, and they'll see what they can recover from them. And so I looked up one of the more recent ones. This is from the beginning of this year. And this technology group that specializes in data erasure, making sure stuff's off hard drives, bought 200 secondhand drives and found that they could recover some type of data from 78% of those drives. And, just it could be anything, not necessarily important data. But 67% of the drives still had photos with geolocation data, so where the picture was taken, which is kind of a little creepy. And then 11% of the drives, which is, still, it's not a ton, but when you're talking 20 of the drives there, 22 of the drives containing company data. So customer information, financial spreadsheets, stuff that really, really, really shouldn't have been on those drives still. So those are kind of the things where it is a real world risk. There are people out there, in this case, thankfully it was a security company or a data erasure company where they're not going to do bad stuff with your data. But there are bad guys who do this, who buy drives and try and grab stuff from them. So it's just really, really, really important to make sure that your data is deleted in a secure fashion before you give away or sell your old Mac.
A lot of companies, in their procedures, they tell you not to log in from home, not to download your emails, not to do this or that. But realistically, a lot of people are workhorses. They are working all the time, and they're checking their emails, they're downloading their data, and some of this data may get transferred onto their personal machines.
Well, which is not a best practice for any company, certainly, except for the part where we got to have this by morning when you're already home. It's, well, that's like a whole, it's always funny to me when we come up with ideas for shows in the middle of other shows. That's like a whole other thing. Expectations from your company for a more secure world. But I don't even know how we would do that. Plus, that's got to be a ways away.
And then the idea of there's so many folks out there going, I have nothing to hide. I don't care if people see my data. I have nothing to hide. Well, if it was a research company, that's cool because they're just using it for the statistics. Mm-hmm. But if you're not selling to your friend or family who isn't looking to harvest this type of data from you, you could be selling it to anybody on the internet. And for the right price, for the cheap price, being able to recover data, being able to see what was on somebody's hard drive, even though you weren't really concerned about anybody finding your data, if people have your data, do you really want them to have it?
Then the other thing to remember is it's not just you. So you've got nothing to hide. Look, I used to be, and it was a long time ago, but I used to walk around with no security code on my phone because it was a pain to type in the security code. Of course, this was before Touch ID, but even before Touch ID, I finally started using a security code because a friend of mine said, "Is your phone number the only phone number on your phone?" And I had a couple of people who probably wouldn't want their phone numbers to be passed around everywhere. And so, even if you think, well, I'm not worried about anything. Okay, well, do you have your mom's email address on your computer? Or, Mom, do you have your son's email address on your computer? Because it's not just about your information. Even if you're fine with people seeing what you have to be seen, you're probably connected to at least one other person, and how are they about it? And then the 5 people they're connected to, and the 10 people they're connected to, and so on and so on and so on. Like that's a shampoo commercial, but different.
That's a really great point. I've had it before where somebody who has your email address gets hacked, and suddenly there's spam being sent out from their address to everybody in their contact list. So suddenly you're getting junk mail because somebody else practiced poor security, and that's just not cool. Even if you think that, okay, I'm giving it to a brother or sister or a family member, I'm not selling it on eBay. Well, what happens if they don't erase data either, and they end up selling it a couple of years later. I mean, yeah, it would be a lot more of their data on it at that point, but if you erase your data before you even let the computer out of your site, it's just going to give you some peace of mind going forward. You won't have to worry about that kind of stuff then.
So as the operating systems change, the way that we actually get rid of this information can change as well. I mean, how like years ago, we were talking before the show, there was a nice bright red button, and it's not quite that simple, but there was a bright red button that said, "Hey, do you want to get rid of all this information?" And you click that button, and all that information is gone. As our computing lives, as our digital lives get more complex, you think that everything gets easier, but some things actually sort of the ease of some things like that go away. Talk to me about where we are today as far as making sure that all my data is off before I pass it someplace else.
Yeah, there's kind of a timely aspect to this whole securely deleting files topic. We had a listener write into us here in between episodes. We had already planned out and scheduled the topic for this week's episode, but we hadn't yet recorded it. And they were asking about, hey, how do I want to securely erase my SSD, but overwriting it would take forever, and could I just use File Vault and have the data go that way? So it kind of led me into a little bit of a rabbit hole with looking up some research on that and making sure I was going to be giving out the correct answer. And it turns out that Apple's actually kind of made some fairly major changes under the hood with Sierra and El Capitan before it to an extent. There used to be, if you've used anything prior to El Capitan, there used to be a secure empty trash feature in the Finder where you could click a different Finder menu and it would overwrite your trash your files in your trash 7 times or something like that with random data to securely remove them. And with El Capitan, suddenly that was no longer an option in the Finder. People couldn't securely empty their trash, and it was like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. And so some people dug into it a little bit further and found that the underlying Unix command built into the operating system still existed, the SRM terminal command. So you could still technically securely remove files. You just kind of had to go about it a little bit more technical fashion. However, as of macOS Sierra, which actually is being released today as we're recording this episode, Apple's removed that terminal command entirely. It's not there anymore. So that kind of everyone's like, okay, so how do I securely delete my files if I can't securely delete my files? Apple does have an answer for that, which is use File Vault. Basically, the reason, as far as we can tell, why Apple chose to go this route was that they see SSDs as the future. The traditional, we kind of mentioned this before, the traditional method of overwriting a file again and again with random data worked on old-style hard drives, but doesn't apply to SSDs. It can technically shorten their lifespan. It's not guaranteed to completely erase the data. So Apple said, okay, we're probably going to be on SSDs for all of our hardware going forward, or soon enough. So we don't want people having a false sense of security regarding this whole secure delete thing, and we also don't want to be shortening the lifespan of our drives. So we're just removing this feature. Because there still needs to be a way for users to make sure their data is gone, using File Vault is the way to go. With File Vault, it's storing your data in an encrypted format on the drive itself, and the operating system will decrypt it on the fly. So it's basically making sure that your files can't be randomly recovered or read if it's just somebody with access to the drive and not the pass key to decrypt them. However, one thing to note is that technically, as we were saying before, with files being written to disk and not being overwritten correctly, you need to have File Vault turned on from the start if you really want to make sure that your data is being removed securely. Otherwise, if you turn on File Vault a few years into the life of your solid-state drive, you're still going to have some of that data in an unencrypted format somewhere on the drive until it eventually gets overwritten just through daily use of the computer. Apple actually, they did have a in-disk utility. They did have, I think they might still have the option in, at least in El Capitan they do, with securely erasing traditional hard drives as part of formatting them. They do not. They don't let you do that with solid-state drives. Again, they said for the fact that it doesn't necessarily securely delete the files, and they didn't mention it on that on the support page, but it also does shorten the life of the drive. They just threw it out the window, and that is also where they were recommending just using File Vault. So when you've already, taking a step back, you've made your backups of your files. You're sure you can get rid of the stuff. You're basically going to reboot your computer into the recovery mode, recovery partition, which you hold down Option-Command-R on your keyboard right after you've turned on your computer or rebooted it, and just kind of wait till the Apple logo shows up. And you'll get a screen where you can do some various things, repair the disk, reinstall the operating system. But in that case, there's a disk utility option, and you click that, and you select your drive, and you go ahead and click the button to erase it and reformat it. And again, sometimes you'll have the option to secure erase it. Otherwise, make sure you had File Vault enabled if you have an SSD, because it won't give you that option. And you'll want to also make sure that you're following these same steps if you have other partitions. Not everybody will have multiple partitions on their computer, but if you do, make sure you're backing up the data from those other partitions. Make sure you're wiping the data from those other partitions as well before you take the step to reinstall the operating system.
Speaking of which, I'm curious about this, actually. So you talked about the fact that we've moved on to SSDs in a lot of our Macs. I mean, it used to be, I've got a copy of Leopard somewhere around here. I've got a copy of Snow Leopard somewhere around here. What I don't have is a copy of El Capitan, because I think you can make a copy of El Capitan, but it's sort of difficult. Talk to me about reinstalling the Mac OS, especially on, well, I mean, the Mac that I'm sitting in front of right now is 2013. So, I mean, it's a 3-year-old Mac. We're not talking about a terribly old machine, and yet reinstalling the operating system, I would think, would be more difficult than in days of yore.
So right now, 3-year-old Macs isn't unsupported hardware.
Right.
I mean, so if you didn't just, or even if you did, take out that hard drive, you replaced it with the new one, or you're just wanting to reinstall the OS on the old hard drive, once you've taken the steps to erase and reformat your hard drive, it's nice to go ahead and reinstall a fresh copy of the system. In the past, you weren't supposed to reinstall the OS when you were selling the computer unless you included the original install disks.
Mm-hmm.
But starting with 10.7, Apple started associating the OS versions with the user's Apple IDs.
It was an issue previously of reselling Apple's software, since it was technically licensed to whoever bought Snow Leopard or whatever on CD.
Right.
Once they switched to the Mac App Store for distribution, they basically kind of threw that out the window, since they're free upgrades, and they say, okay, the Apple ID will have whatever version of the operating system they're allowed to have is associated with that. If they technically didn't already pay for that upgrade to Snow Leopard and then go from there to the App Store versions, you'd have to pay to buy an old Snow Leopard CD from Apple, which they still sell. I found that out the other day. They still sell them. And you have to install Snow Leopard. This is if you're trying to move from 10.5 and your computer is still running that. You can run El Capitan actually on a lot of those systems, but you have to buy Snow Leopard first, which is kind of silly. It's like $20, but once you have that and you've kind of upgraded the operating system, then you don't. So you don't have, if you're anything higher than Snow Leopard, you don't have to worry about that. You can go ahead and reinstall it, and whoever you're selling it to will thank you, and they don't have to do that themselves.
And then if your hardware can actually support it, do actually upgrade it, because you're getting the most latest updates for the operating system at that time. So you're not running older versions of the software, so you're updating to the latest versions of the software that you're installing for.
You would need to do that before you went ahead and erased all your files, though. You can't do that once you hit the recovery partition. The recovery partition is just reinstalling whatever copy of the operating system you're currently running. It'll download it from the internet if it really has to, but if you're running, say your computer can run Sierra, but you're running El Capitan, and you didn't bother upgrading to Sierra before you wiped your files, you can reinstall El Capitan from the recovery partition. But if you wanted Sierra on the computer, you would have needed to have done that before you erased all the files on your system.
So to reinstall OS 10, click the Reinstall OS 10 from the OS 10 Utilities window, and then follow the instructions that appear on your screen. Once your install is complete, your Mac will automatically restart, and a setup assistant will appear on your screen. You won't need to continue with the setup at this time. Go ahead and Command Q, quit it with your keyboard, and click Shutdown. That way, the new owner of your computer could actually go through and complete the setup and configuration processes at this time.
That would actually, that's kind of a funny idea. So I'm getting my computer ready to sell, and then I come to the setup screen. So I go ahead and set it up, and then, oh, look, I get to set up my computer to sell again, going back to item 1 on the checklist.
Well, the first thing it's going to want you to do is log into your Apple ID, yeah?
I think it's your Wi-Fi network is language first, and I believe it's Wi-Fi. So they'd have your Wi-Fi password. Not like it really would matter there, but no, you can just, as soon as that setup assistant shows up, you can just quit it. It'll start back up from scratch when they turn on the computer for the first time, which is the exact same experience you'd get if you purchase it directly from Apple.
So we've reached item 5 on the checklist. You've now gotten your Mac ready to sell. Technically, you got all your information off of it. You've got the latest operating system that you can get onto it if you're, being nice to the next person who's going to buy it. There are actually ways to get a few more dollars, though, out of selling your Mac. Talk to me about ways to maximize the resale value, or, make sure you get as much as you can get for your hardware.
And we've touched on this before.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on to those Apple boxes when you buy products.
And clean your computer before you actually package it up, or even before you take the pictures of it. Clean the screen, clean the keyboard, wipe it down, make it look pretty.
Yeah.
And take a picture of it in front of a good environment. You don't want a whole bunch of grimy stuff in the background, because they're going to know your computer was used and abused.
Fingerprints on the screen and disgusting dirty keyboard. Yeah, it doesn't take very long to clean them up, and it's just a nice thing to do. Also, if you have any of those accessories or peripherals that came with your Mac, the Apple keyboard or mouse, for example, or the trackpad. I got one of the Apple trackpads with a computer I bought a number of years ago, and I think it's sitting in a drawer somewhere because I ended up using a different mouse. But that technically is what came with the computer. So were I to sell it, I should probably track that down and put it back in the box with everything else. One other thing to note is, more people forget this than you'd think, but if you have a desktop Mac, don't forget the power cord. So they can actually turn it on when they get it. And the same goes for a laptop. If you have a laptop, don't forget the charging cable and power adapter, because that laptop battery is not going to last very long otherwise, and those are actually still fairly expensive to purchase from Apple for replacement. So,
yeah, they are. Plus, they've actually changed them over the past few years. So,
yeah.
I mean, I know that I came across a Mac. I can't remember which family member passed it my way, but I thought, oh, no big deal, because I've got like 4 power cords, but not a single one of them actually worked with that particular laptop. So yeah, it's the best thing to do for the person who's buying it. I mean, even if they think they've got one, you don't need it anymore because you don't have that computer. So go ahead and pass it along to them.
So yeah, I mean, at that point, it's, you're pretty much done. Just put everything back in that pretty Apple box, package it up, and you've already taken your pictures of it to post it on eBay, so it's all set to go out in the mail once you actually close that auction, or bring it to Goodwill, donate the computer.
Very cool. So that's a lot of information that we just covered here, but as I mentioned earlier, that information is all available for you to peruse. If there's a particular step that you missed or want to double check before you go on, the place to do that is securemac.com/checklist. That is where you'll find not only information about this particular episode, but all of the episodes we've done so far and all the episodes we're ever going to do. And as always, if you have any questions about stuff that you've heard today, something specific that you feel like you need a little bit more information on, questions you would like to hear us cover at some point, or other things that you feel like we need to know, the email address is checklist@securemac.com. That is checklist@securemac.com. And if you have trouble remembering that email address, just remember, You're listening to The Checklist by Secure Mac, and we'll talk to you soon.